Hello, government students. This is part 2 of our presentation on the powers and duties of the president. In our first session, we talked about the president's executive power, which involved executing the laws. It also included the president's ordinance power. That's that power to issue executive orders, which carry the force of law. And we talked about the president's appointment powers. So executing the law, ordinance powers, and appointment powers were all a part of the president's executive power. We also talked about his diplomatic power, and that includes negotiating treaties, negotiating executive agreements with other countries. And you'll recall executive agreements do carry the force of law, just as a treaty does. In fact, you could say an executive agreement is to a treaty as an executive order is to a law. And the diplomatic power also included the power of recognition, that is, recognizing the legal existence of another nation state. And then we wrapped up our discussion in the previous lesson, in the previous video, with the president's military power. The president is the commander-in-chief of the armed services, and as such, officers must obey the president. They must defer to his judgment. Any wise president will seek the advice and judgment of his well-respected and well-seasoned military officers, but ultimately it is the president who is in charge. And that means that an officer of our armed forces, no matter if he's a lieutenant or a general, he is not allowed to publicly criticize the President of the United States. That is considered insubordination. An officer cannot disobey the president. That would be grounds for court-martial. And it has happened. Even very high officers have been booted out of the military for breaking those rules, publicly criticizing or going against the wishes of the commander-in-chief. So let's continue today with the powers of the president by looking at his fourth power, and that's his legislative power. And I've quoted the part of the Constitution which gives the president his legislative power. The president shall from time to time give to the Congress information of the state of the Union and recommend to their consideration such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient. Every year, typically in January or February, the president gives his State of the Union address. I believe President Biden's was a little bit later this year, probably due to the COVID pandemic in 2021-2022. But he did give the State of the Union, I believe, in March. And again, the purpose of that is to basically say how the president believes the country is doing today. And then he offers his advice, his agenda to the Congress, and tells Congress what he would like the Congress to focus on in the coming year. Congress is under no requirement to go along with what the president wants, but if the president and Congress are controlled by the same political party, typically Congress will follow the president's wishes in their legislative session. Okay, legislative powers include several things. It includes setting the legislative agenda, and typically that starts in that State of the Union address, which we discussed. It also involves using the veto. That is a legislative power, killing legislation. That's the veto. And the president has the power to call Congress into special session. This is rarely done, but for example, if Congress goes on recess, they close the session for the year, they go on recess, that's kind of their vacation, they're done for the year. The president does have the authority to force them to come back to Washington, D.C. and do some business. I think the last time that was done was before I was born, when President Truman was in office in the 1950s. But the president does have that authority to call them into a special session. And the last power I want to touch upon is the president's judicial power. And that includes several things, and these are definitions you definitely need to know. The judicial power includes the reprieve. A reprieve is delaying carrying out a criminal sentence. And we talked about this, I believe, when we were looking at the powers of governors. The governor has reprieve power as well. So why would someone want to delay carrying out a sentence? I'll give you an example. Let's say that someone was recently, let's say a few years ago, sentenced to a criminal penalty for selling marijuana. Well, marijuana has been legalized. in many states. So the president may choose to delay the carrying out of this sentence, knowing that a legislative authority is thinking about decriminalizing the sale of marijuana, making it legal. Why go ahead and send someone to jail for that offense if it's about to be made not a crime anyway? So the president may give a reprieve. We're going to delay putting him in jail, see what the Congress does in making this legal or not. And if Congress were to make the sale of marijuana legal, then the president could pardon this individual. So that would be an example of a reprieve. Another example might be if someone were sentenced to death, and there might be a Supreme Court case that involves something very similar to what someone was convicted of that might have given them the death penalty. And the Supreme Court might decide that that penalty would be unconstitutional under the circumstances of this person's arrest and crime. The president may reprieve putting this person to death to see what the decision will be by the Supreme Court. That would be another example of why you would do that. There's also commutation power, and this is where you reduce the length or severity of a criminal sentence. Let's say you were sentenced to 20 years in prison because it was your third arrest on a felony charge of selling some kind of drug, illegal drug. You were selling cocaine. Maybe you were only about 19 years old, but it was your third arrest. And as a result of it being your third arrest, you received a very severe penalty of 20 years in the federal penitentiary. Let's say that you were a model prisoner. You went to prison. You never got into any trouble. You got your GED, your graduate degree. You've gone on to work in the prison yards and in a productive way. The president hears that you have been a model prisoner. You've done all you can to make your life worthwhile in those circumstances. He may choose to give you a commutation. That is, he will say, you know what, you've done good in prison, you've served 10 years, you are now a free man, you can leave. Now, your sentence, your record will still say that you committed the crime, but your sentence is over. The president has reduced the severity of the sentence. Next up is a pardon, and we've talked about this as well. A pardon is complete forgiveness of a criminal offense. It has a lot of the same realistic effect as a commutation, but the difference between a pardon and a commutation is, in the case of the commutation, the record of your crime remains. If you are pardoned, the record of your crime is cleaned. It's as if the crime never happened. So given the choice between a pardon and a commutation, you would rather have the pardon. That will make it much easier for you in life to go about getting a job and that sort of thing. Your record becomes clean. And the last of these judicial powers is an amnesty. An amnesty is the forgiveness of the criminal offense of a group of law violators who all committed the same offense. And I have this picture here. You may not be able to tell what's happening is here in this picture, but these people, and this is probably in the late 1960s or early 1970s, these people are burning their draft cards. They have been drafted to go serve in the Army, likely to serve in the Vietnam War. And in the late 60s, there were quite a few of these people who were called draft dodgers who chose not to serve in the Vietnam War and chose not to show up for their service, even though they were drafted into the Army. That was a crime. Many of these people who did this actually moved to Canada or other countries so that they would not be arrested for dodging the draft. And then in the late 1970s, President Carter decided it was time to forgive these people. The Vietnam War was over, and he wanted to, basically put it all behind us, and he offered an amnesty to anyone who was wanted for the crime of avoiding the draft. That would be an example of an amnesty, forgiveness of a criminal offense of an entire class of people who committed the same crime. Okay, finally, we're going to talk about other roles of the president. These are not constitutional duties of the president, but they're the roles that by tradition the president actually fulfills for our nation. And first of all, the president is considered the head of state of the United States. That means this is the ceremonial role of representing the United States in formal ceremonial occasions, similar to the way the Queen of England is considered the head of state of the United Kingdom. Um, the Queen does not have political power to speak of. She's got a little bit, but it's very little bit. But mainly her role is as head of state. She represents the United Kingdom to the world. The president represents the United States of America to the world as the head of state in ceremonial occasions. So he's greeting the Queen here in his role as head of state. The president might welcome the athletes of the world to the Olympics when the Olympics are held in the United States. And if he does that, he's acting in his role as head of state, representing the entire nation in his role as president. And one other role that the president fulfills is as the head of party. The president of the United States, by virtue of being the president, is automatically the head of his political party. President Biden today is the head of the Democratic Party. President Trump was the head of the Republican Party. And you see in this picture, this man here is Senator Mitch McConnell. He is the leader of the Republicans in the Senate. This man here is Kevin McCarthy, the lead of the Republicans in the House of Representatives. At least as I speak, he is. There are some people who would like to change heads of the Republicans in the House of Representatives right now. He's kind of fighting right now for his continued role there. But regardless, they are not the ones who are in charge of the party. It was President Trump who was the leader of the party, and they sort of go along then with whatever Trump wants to do as the head of the party. And today, the same can be said for the Democrats with President Biden. President Biden is the head of the party, even though Nancy Pelosi is the Speaker of the House and Chuck Schumer is the Senate Majority Leader. It is President Biden who really controls the agenda of what the Democratic Party wishes to do. And with that, we're going to stop this presentation. You'll want to check Canvas. I believe there's something for you there. Have a great day.